So a question to you that and this is, a lot of times, and totally understandably, and it's valid, a lot of times an interviewer will ask a question that they have an answer to in their minds, but they want to hear the person. I don't have an answer to this one. So I am truly asking you, and just to see how you have grappled with it. So I believe in a designer, and I believe in design. So in light of that, and this is more of a theodicy question, a reconciling God and the suffering question, but nevertheless. So if we're designed, why do there seem to be so many flaws in the design? Throughout history, I would say half the children who were born died before their first birthday. Doesn't that strike you as a flaw in the design?
I do address this in the book. There's different things that people can mean when they start to go down this road of asking why are things the way they are. One of them that I give as an example is the panda's thumb. So there are these things where you look at a healthy thing and say that's not the way an intelligent designer would design it. The panda, the giant panda, you may know, has this thumb-like extension on the paw.
Well, wasn't that the name of one of Dawkins' books? The Panda's Thumb, or somebody, or maybe...
There's a website called The Panda's Thumb.
Oh, okay, all right.
I don't know if there's a book. There may be. But this extension on the paw allows the panda to strip the leaves off of bamboo for eating the leaves off bamboo. It's not a proper jointed thumb like ours, so it's not a true thumb, but there's this little bone extension that allows the panda to do that. So that's one example that's been put forward, and a lot of people have invested much time and effort in writing and saying, here's an example of something that's not done the way a good designer would do it.
All right, hold on. Perfect. Time for a break. We'll hear the answer when we come back. So I asked you a sort of $64,000 question, and that is if it's designed. This is a big argument offered by the anti-design people, and it's an argument that does not strike me as absurd. I think a lot of absurdity in the anti-design world, but this is not one. Anyway, if it's designed, why do there seem to be so many flaws? And I gave the example of, until modern science, about half the babies born died before the age of 1. So you were saying...
I agree, first of all, that this is not an absurd objection. It's a very weighty objection that needs to be answered very carefully. I addressed it in part in the book, and I kind of broke off two different avenues of critique here, and one is not babies dying. Well, one of them is why is there so much brokenness and evil in the world, natural evil, diseases, cancer, birth defects, etc. Another is to look at healthy things and say, why are they this way? This doesn't seem to be the way an intelligent designer would make them. With respect to that second one, I gave the panda's thumb as an example.
By the way, Stephen Jay Gould did write a book, The Panda's Thumb.
Yes, I recalled that during the break.
Yep.
Gould did.
Right.
So my answer to that in the book is that when we critique something like that, we're placing ourselves in a position of a critic, a biocritic, I call it in the book. And I question whether anyone has risen to the level of understanding that would make that position appropriate. In other words, when we look at a panda and say that's not the way a designer should have done it, it's as though we're saying, oh, and by the way, I've made things like pandas. Trust me, that's not the way an intelligent designer would do it. Since no one has risen to anything like that level of design, the very best human designs don't even touch pandas or any other living thing. I question whether anyone actually belongs in that seat of as a critic of living things. But that's separate from the question of brokenness and evil, all the things that we see in the living world that we know are not right, and we all know that. That's a very deep question, and there I think the false logic that's sometimes put forward is if God is good and all-powerful, then there cannot be this kind of brokenness and evil in the world. And I would say that's not quite correct. What's the correct statement is if God is good and all-powerful, then a world where that brokenness and evil exists, which is this world, cannot be the final state of affairs. In other words, there will be an answer to this. If God is good and all-powerful, we're waiting for the answer.
Okay, I accept that, but not both. I do accept it, I guess the only alternative in any event, when I have asked this question, I have then challenged myself and said, okay, so Dennis, well, all right, imagine that every single child ever born was perfectly healthy, because that's your only alternative. So that means that in a designed world, the implication of that question is there can't be illness. And then that does become a little odd. That means that God would only, or the designer could only have made a utopia. Otherwise, there's no design. And that doesn't strike me as plausible either. So I think,
Right.
thinking with you through this, that there really is an answer. And I accept yours entirely, and I assume that a big part of it is an afterlife. Correct?
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Do any schools today in America allow, from a purely scientific perspective, the teaching of design?
Colleges and universities, or
Anything.
well, as you know, it's a real hot button in public schools. My kids are all in public schools, and I think people would have to tread very cautiously there. In colleges and universities, certainly private ones, there are ones that favor the design approach and teach that. Again, the public ones have to tread very cautiously, and I think the ones that I know of are teaching design or allowing discussion of design in philosophy courses, but probably not in life science courses.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. All right, let me go to some calls here. And this is in Van Nuys, California. Ian. Hi, Ian. Dennis Prager with Douglas Axe. Hi.
Hello, Dennis. Hello, Douglas. I'm an atheist who is judged every day by people whose opinions matter to me. So I think it's ridiculous that you think I'd be worried about being judged by someone whose standard of morality is about on par with ISIS, when in Leviticus 20:13 he commands that we kill homosexuals. But the reason that I called is to put forth the experiment. I believe it was Lenski who did demonstrate that bacteria can evolve new function in the laboratory. It's been an ongoing experiment where bacteria were deprived of the food that they normally eat and given only a food which they were previously incapable of eating, and they evolved the ability to digest that. It was a new biochemical function, and they went back, because they've been freezing each generation of bacteria, and sequenced the DNA to find out exactly what changes were responsible for that. And I assume you've addressed it in your book, but I really haven't heard any science so far in this segment.
I don't address that in the book. Actually, the intent of the book, I'm not sure we stated this. Although I've spent 25 years doing technical work in critique of the Darwinian paradigm, the book actually is aimed at making a non-technical argument. And the reason for that is I just wanted more people to get why the Darwinian story doesn't work. Your example that you bring up, the Richard Lenski work, 40,000 or maybe more now, like 50,000 generations of E. coli, is a great piece of work, far better than a lot of other pieces of work that have been trotted out as though they support Darwin's theory. In fact, though, there wasn't anything new invented. It was citrate metabolism, so these E. coli strain could not metabolize citrate. At the end of I don't know how many tens of thousands of generations, they could metabolize citrate, but the machinery for doing that was already there. It was simply a latent set of genes that gets turned on by a metabolic switch. And in fact, although Lenski presented that as though doing a long-term evolution experiment uncovered something extraordinary, Scott Minnick at University of Idaho has replicated the same thing, got the same result in, I believe, under 2 weeks. So it is not at all an invention. It's a very simple switch. It can be flipped over very quickly. It was simply the difference between Minnick's work and Lenski's was that Lenski did daily, or Lenski's graduate students, or whoever did this, did daily dilutions and re-inoculations, and Minnick let these things sit in what's called stationary phase for extended period, and you get the same thing very quickly. So there's no remarkable invention at all in
All
Lenski.
right. I'm sure Ian is... Ian, you convinced now?
There's papers
Surprisingly,
written on
no. But,
I'm sorry, what?
I appreciate the attempt.
Okay, good. So now let me answer your little crack at Leviticus. Do you believe that Western civilization has been morally superior to all others?
I think in some ways the current Western civilization is morally superior to...
What civilization other than the West abolished slavery or created human rights or democracy? Can you name any? Okay, so the answer is the same book that you crapped on is the book.
Chinese who have
no, the Chinese didn't.
No longer have
no,
slaves
no,
have abolished slavery as well.
No, yeah. Now they have. Okay. Anyway, look, I could spend the hour with you. I don't want to take it away from Douglas Axe. Everybody has this line from the Bible that they love to throw out, whether it's homosexuals or kids who are rebellious. Meanwhile, it is that book, Leviticus and Numbers and Exodus and Genesis and Deuteronomy and the rest of the Bible that made the civilization that made human rights possible, and it all emanated from that. There was no other book on earth that said love the stranger. Okay? So a little perspective is always very helpful. Gee, it produced the best civilization in the world, but the book is crappy. It's not tenable. Hi, everybody. Dennis Prager here. Final segment with Douglas Axe. His very readable book based on a lifetime of research. Undeniable. How biology confirms our intuition that life is designed. We live in a strange age, if I may editorialize personally for a moment. An age that really does believe that it is more logical to believe that everything came about by chance. One day, I am truly convinced. One day, we will be regarded as one of the strangest periods in the history of the world. That the entire, or nearly the entire intellectual world was dominated by the belief that everything happened on its own. In that regard, your book is undeniable. It could have been the obverse of it, if you will, improbable. It could have been the title, and the book is showing how improbable it is that everything was done by coincidence. So much so that I have had scientists on who now actually believe that it is so improbable that life, let alone intelligent life, evolved on its own, that there simply hasn't been enough time in this universe. So now they posit that there are an infinite number of universes to get around it.
Indeed.
I mean, which they acknowledge can never, ever be proven or disproven. There cannot be contact with another universe. So they are positing something that is literally unprovable and undisprovable, and then they laugh at us who think that life suggests a designer.
I do take that idea on in the book and actually show that what we see here on planet Earth is totally inconsistent with the idea that it arose here because there are an infinite number of universes. So although you can't prove or disprove whether there are other universes, you can show that that hypothesis does not explain what we see here.
The book, my friends, is undeniable, and it's undeniably good. How biology confirms our intuition that life is designed. Douglas Axe, it has been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.